Good night, everyone. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we could hear you.
Okay, wonderful. All right. I would like to thank everyone for joining us, joining the ISC2 Caribbean chapter for this presentation. It's a webinar on resume writing and interviewing techniques. So the idea for this is we are trying to ensure that we build a well-rounded um, technology, cybersecurity professional. And in order to become well-rounded, we need to have certain skills. We need to gain certain skills. We need to gain certain insights. And how we do that is by developing certain skills, certain soft skills that will help us in the world of work. So one area that is extremely important that we may not pay enough attention to is writing our resumes, crafting the perfect resume. And why we will have to craft the perfect resume? Because the resume is usually our first point of contact when we are trying to sell ourselves to an employer or a prospective um, company. Even if we are doing consultancy, even if you're doing consultancy, your resume is always required and it's always a representation of who you are and what your capabilities are. And together with your resume, you would find that being able to interview well is another very important area that we often fail in. So we tend to have very qualified individuals, very qualified professionals, but when they face the interviewing panel, they fail. And it's not a very good thing for your self-esteem and it's not a very good thing for your careers if you are unable to shine during an interview. So we have a very experienced um, HR professional here with us who is going to help us as we are technical, most of us are technical minded individuals, try to help us with our resumes, crafting the perfect resume and being able to interview well during interviews. So I just want to go through the bio of this expert. Her name is Ruan Payson, and she is a highly accomplished HR professional with over 15 years of experience driving strategic HR initiatives, boosting employee engagement, and optimizing operational efficiency. She holds a graduate certificate in management and a Bachelor of Science in Behavioral Science with a minor in business administration. She has led and optimized HR teams. She has a very extensive HR skill set. She brings a comprehensive set of skills to the table encompassing areas like staffing and recruiting and performance management, employee employment law, employee relations, change management, HR policy on onboarding, and HR software utilization. She is also certified as a strategic HR business partner, a change management professional, and has completed training in advanced alternative discipline resolution, dispute resolution, sorry. Additionally, Ruan possesses strong knowledge of labor laws, the labor laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and good industrial relations practices. So Ruan is also the owner of a company called C-Suite Professionals Limited. And what that company does, it provides HR services to organizations and individuals. So if you're looking for um, some HR consultancy, you could contact her and she would be able to provide those services. So now I would like to pass the mic on to Ruan.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and good evening, everyone. I know I might be cutting into some people's news time. Some people may just be having dinner. But with your help, I hope that this evening will be an interesting session. And also that we both walk away with some new information so that we can build stronger, more successful persons for organizations. So I guess y'all are here to learn about or find out more information about resume writing and also about interview skills. So just by a raise of hand, can you tell me those who have reviewed their resume within the last 6 months? So anybody who has reviewed or changed their resume in the last 6 months? Okay. Anybody reviewed or changed their resume within the last year? Great. So how often do you think you should review your resume or make any changes to your resume? So anyone who can, because I know some people may be commuting, some people may be just listening. Anyone who can, tell me how often they think they should change their resume or make changes to their resume. So everybody commuted on hands, Phil, that nobody could unmute and answer?
Hello, good night. Can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you.
This is Kasik speaking. So, I think in general, you should always review your resumes. I would say probably twice every year, or if there are any significant achievements or changes in terms of role.
Right. So if you have changes in terms of role, if you have any significant changes to your resume. When we say significant changes, can you give me an example of what that might look like?
An example would be new achievements, new certifications.
Right, new achievements, new certifications.
Correct.
Okay, great. So I'm seeing in the chat someone says they haven't changed theirs in like 3 years, but they believe it should be changed yearly. It's interesting. So tonight, what I'm hoping to do is to give everyone an understanding of the basics of what a resume is and what it should look like. Also, we're going to look at how to craft an effective resume, design and formatting tips, and how to avoid some common mistakes. Once we've gotten through the resume part of things, then we'll go into the interviewing part of things. Because once we have an effective resume, then it should mean you would be invited for an interview by your prospective employer. So, in the world of resumes, we hear 2 things primarily. We will hear resume, we may hear curriculum vitae or CV. They're the same thing, right? Do you all agree it's the same thing? So normally when somebody asks a question, we like an answer, right? Do you all think CV and resume means the same thing?
I think it does.
So can I see by a raise of hands all those who agree that CV and resume are the same thing or mean the same thing? Just by a show of hands or a thumbs up. Is there anyone here who thinks that a CV is different from a resume? Pedro, is your hand raised because I'm making you think it different, or you really think it's different? So they are actually two different types of documents. A CV or curriculum vitae shows or means what your course of life is in Latin. So a CV tends to be a more comprehensive document that lists everything in your academic and professional life. So if you've written articles, if you've done webinars, all of that goes on your CV. There's no limit to the number of pages or word count for your CV. So CVs tend to be really long. And usually someone would use their CV when applying for a academic role. So if you want to become a professor, or if you're going to be a lecturer, you would use your CV in those circumstances. Your resume, on the other hand, despite the fact that people tend to use the terms interchangeably, your resume is much shorter and it's a more specific document. And it's used for job applications other than in the academic world. Resume is French. There are actually two accents on the word resume, on the E's, which means to sum up. So in essence, your resume is a summary or a quick overview of your work history, your education, and your skill sets. So when we're looking at our resume, one of the things that we have to consider is, what job am I applying for? Normally, people will have one resume and they tend to send that out for any job that they think they might want to apply for. People generally send out resumes in response to a job posting. One rule of thumb when designing or developing a resume is that your resume should not be longer than 1 page. In my experience, that only works for entry-level positions. So people who may not have had a lot of work experience and now entering the world of work could safely say 1 page for their resume. However, for persons who have been in the world of work for more than 5 years and have generally occupied different roles, you'll find that keeping your resume on 1 page tends to be very difficult. The other thing that you can look at or consider is, what exactly are you going to put on this resume? So your resume is the document that's going to go to, in some instances, the recruiter. In smaller companies, it may just go straight to the human resources manager. And now we have where your resumes go into the applicant tracking system. Previously, people used to design resumes like this. So it'll look real pretty. You might have your picture there, your name bold. You could probably have colors, something that's eye-catching, right? Because you want to catch the attention of the person who is going to be reading your resume. These days, it's not the person who's reading your resume to begin with. These days, you have the applicant tracking system. So remember, I said we should tailor your resume to the job that you're applying for. If you do happen to know, you should also tailor your resume to the company or the person you're going to be applying to, who's going to be reading your resume. So, if you know that the company you're applying to does not use an applicant tracking system, then it's relatively simple that you continue along with the, I want to call it the graphic-driven resume, the one where you may have colors or you may have a photo of yourself on the resume. I wouldn't say to put a photo of yourself on your resume, because one of the things that happens is that people have innate biases. And while we would like them to see a photo of you and think, hey, I want that person to work with me, that could also work against you. Also, when using colors, you need to be mindful of the colors that you're using on your resume. If you're one of those persons who likes to use a lot of colors on your resume, I would suggest that you go with either something along the blue palette, primarily because blue signifies trust and it encourages people to want to read more. And also, depending on the company that you're applying to, I would suggest that you could possibly include the company colors in your resume. Kind of says that you have an affinity to the organization or you really want to work with them. You've put in some effort into knowing something about the company, and that way you would move forward. You would pique the interest of the person who's reading your resume as well. So since your resume is a summary or sum up of what you are or who you are as a professional, you will notice on this picture of a resume, you have some headings. Oftentimes, the order of these headings help in determining if the person is going to remain interested in reading your resume. So you have to look at the layout of your resume, and then you have to look at the words that you use in your resume and make it interesting. It's said that a recruiter spends a maximum of 3 minutes reading a resume. Some say the first thing they look for is to make sure that the resume itself is easy to read. So your font size, making sure that it's clear and concise and easy to read. Those are some of the things that you have to consider when building or developing your resume. So coming back to the first question that I asked in terms of how often should you review your resume? You should actually review your resume every time you're going to apply for a position, because you should amend the resume in order to reflect the key things that the person or the company is requesting in their job posting. So let's say you're looking for a job post, you're looking at a job posting for a software engineer. You're going to look at the advertisement and you're going to look for what is it the company is, what is the requirement of the job? What is it that they're asking the person to do? Do you have those skills that they're looking for? If you do, that's some of the things that you should highlight on your resume, because you don't want your resume to roll over. If you're a professional with more than 5 years experience, your resume should not roll over 2 pages, because the recruiter, if it's a small company, is going to get bored with reading your resume and move on. Basically, they want to see that you have some of the key things that they're looking for in that position. So when you're writing the summary or your resume summary, those are some of the things that you should look at. When you're looking for your position, you know, they have a brief description of the job. Let's say it's the job purpose. You're going to look at that, see what some of the things that they're looking for. Is it that they want you to be able to program in a specific language? If that's the case, then in your job summary, you should indicate the number of years experience you have and also highlight that particular language that they're asking for, if it's programming that you're looking at. If, for example, and I'm just going to pull up a recent advertisement for an IT security monitoring and response manager. So this job posting says that this role is responsible for improving the security of the firm's environment through the implementation of effective security monitoring and incident response processes. It's saying that the position is going to provide back office support to member firms, and it is responsible for improving the security of the firm's environment through the implementation of effective security monitoring and incident responses processes. So if you're going to write a summary about yourself to apply for this role, what are some of the key things that you need to include? Your summary should include whether you have experience in the development of security monitoring and response processes. It should speak to any experience you may have in providing services to a client, because the job summary indicated that you are to provide back office support to members of a firm. So if you have experience dealing with external clients, the provision of security services for an organization, that's also something that you need to include in your summary. So your summary could read something like, I am an IT professional with over 10 years experience in the cybersecurity environment. I have participated in the development of processes for incident responses and security monitoring. So that way the person who's reading your summary can see that you have the experience that they are looking for and the skill set that they are looking for that position. The other thing that you want to make sure that you do, as you would see in the example that's listed there, there's a section for skills. So in that section, what you should do is provide, like in the top part, the first 2 lines, you should put the skills that they are looking for in that job. So if they want cybersecurity experience, if they want process mapping, because that's a way of building processes, if they want documentation or policy development, you put those key skills first in your skills column or in your skills group. This is just one example of how people can display their skills. Some people use graphical representations of their skill set or to show what their skill set looks like. Generally, in the IT environment, we don't really recommend using a lot of graphics. However, what I will say is if you have numerous skill sets, if you could just list it how this example shows, that is also a way that you can go. Sometimes people might put the skill set and then give themselves stars to show the level of skills that they have. So for example, you can have something like project management, and you give yourself 4 stars saying that you are at almost an expert level. So it's like a ranking of your skills, and you can put, let's say leadership, and you give yourself 2 stars, which means that you don't have an expert level, but you might be at an intermediate level, because generally people are very familiar with the 5-star system. So just that graphical representation of your skill set can also help in some instances. It's not something that I would encourage because it's a way of ranking yourself. And suppose you rank yourself using your scale, and when someone else chats with you, they're like, but you're not at a beginner level in this skill set. You're really at an intermediate or even at an expert level. So that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't recommend using the graphical depiction for your skill set. So just to recap what we're at so far, your summary statement, which will be a summary of your experience or your professional skills specific to the job that you're applying for. It should not be more than 3 sentences, and it just offers like a quick high-level glimpse into what you are capable of doing or the relevant skills as it pertains to that particular job that you're applying for. The other section that you're going to look at is your skill set. So that skills is just a summary of skills that they are looking for in the job that you have, and it would be keywords that they would have expressed in the job posting or the advertisement that they're looking for. The other sections that we look at would be your qualifications or your education and also your experience. For professionals, I recommend that you put your experience before your education and qualifications. Why? Because your experience will tend to show the things that you have done. So it's showing them what you are capable of doing as it pertains to the job that you're applying for. When listing your experiences, I would suggest that you put your job title, the company that you've worked for, which is common, the duration that you've worked for them. And when you list at least, actually no more than 5 bullet points of key deliverables or key things that you were responsible for. So you created or you documented or you managed or you led a team of. You were a partner in developing X, Y, and Z as it pertains to the job that you are applying for. So that way you can narrow down for the recruiter and identify things that they are looking for, not only things that you have or things that you have done. The other part would be your education and your core qualifications. So your qualifications are there as another set of skills that you have, and your education would be the academic qualifications or that you have earned, your certifications that you have earned. So generally, those are the sections or the components of a resume. In the resume that you have on the screen, you would see something along the lines of strengths. So it's just another component that people often use simply to help the recruiter know that, hey, I'm good at this, or these are things that I have done, or these are the areas that I think are my strengths. So in this resume, you see the person puts that they are creative problem solving, that they have strong leadership, and they have efficient resource allocation. Those are what they have identified as their strengths. This is a nice to have. It's not a must have. It just provides, as I would have indicated before, a summary of some key things that you can bring to the table. So your skills will be your technical skills, and those strengths that they have, there would be your business skills. So in Anthony's introduction to this afternoon's session, he would have mentioned that to have a well all-rounded IT professional, it's good for us to develop soft skills. Personally, I don't like the term soft skills. My preference is for business skills because there's nothing soft about dealing with people, which is where those business skills come into play. So creative problem solving, not everyone can do it. It's not an easy thing. It's a business skill that will help propel you and your organization forward. So generally, I think we have 2 types of skills. We have our technical skills, which will be the academic side of things, and we have our business skills, which tend to be less academic. But we still do have certifications and qualifications for them. But they are both important in making a well-rounded employee. IRL talking. Anybody has any questions so far? If you can't talk, you can feel free to type it in the chat. Yes, I see a raised hand. Kariba, do I have your name correct?
Yeah, you have it correct. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Just to circle back on what you said a while ago. Um, so your strengths would, or your business skills, would it be fine to use competencies instead of strengths or soft skills? Or would that be an accepted term?
Well, absolutely. But remember, competencies are all encompassing. So you have technical competencies and you have business competencies.
Okay.
Because,
Okay.
yeah, so competencies are skills. And in that grouping, they can be broken down into technical competencies, business competencies. Some organizations even break it down further into subsets according to subject areas. So you can have leadership competencies, IT competencies, health, safety, and environment competencies. So if you wanted to use the term competencies, I would suggest you put a qualifier in front of competencies. So you can use business competencies, or if you want to go specific to a subject matter area, like if you have IT competencies. So even where you have skills on this example, you could have put IT competencies and listed some of the key skills that you have in the realm of information technology.
Understood.
That's no problem. That's a good one, though. Christopher?
Hi, good night. I have a
Hi.
question slightly different. I know this is regarding like the paper, the soft copy CVs, but let's say a LinkedIn profile. Should you put the same quantity of information as a resume, or should it be like a middle ground between a resume and a CV, since you're allowed more space and the person has more time to scroll through your page? And second to that, like a digital or online resume, like a website. Does that help in the recruiting process, or is not necessary, or is just a nice to have? Like a personal website with your portfolios and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting because it depends on the organization. Again, if the organization is technology driven, then someone may go to the website and check out the information. In other instances, where it's a small organization and there's someone looking at the document, they may not be pressed to go to your website. Also, in some instances, persons do have to print out documents to send forward as for someone else to read. So it depends on the organization itself and if they are going to be doing that. You know, what I would suggest is that the website could be there for someone to get a more in-depth information on you. As it pertains to your LinkedIn profile, it depends on what you are going to use your LinkedIn profile for. So some people use their LinkedIn profile to share professional opinions, to share information. Some people use their LinkedIn profile primarily as a supplement to their job seeking opportunities. I tell you, I go on people's LinkedIn profile not to read what I'm already seeing on their resume, but to see how active they are and to get a sense of if they remain current in their field. Because there's some people who have not updated their LinkedIn profile since they started. They don't post things, and if they do post something, it's far and few between. You know, your LinkedIn profile, you do have more space there. So you can add, or that could be generic to show all of your skill sets, whereas your resume will be tailored for the posting that you are applying for, if that helps, Christopher.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
No problem. Any other questions? Yes, Joel.
All right, so good evening. Can you hear me?
I'm hearing you, Joel.
Okay. So this question is more focused towards student resumes or those just leaving university. A common recommendation is to have volunteer experience on your resume as like a boost to show values or character. I'm wondering, what do you say to that, and like how much to include and where to include it, is if the best place is on the resume.
Right. So yes, they do recommend volunteerism primarily because the expectation is that you do not have a lot of working experience. Generally, I would put that just before any other qualifications you may have. So for someone who's now graduating, and I'm going to use university level because that's the one that we're referring to, you may not have a summary because you do not have work experience of that nature. What you can put is objectives. So you are seeking to become a IT professional in the field of, and you can identify a specific IT field if that's where you want to go, or if you just want to be an IT business partner. Some things that you can include that people don't generally mention, but projects that you've worked on at university level. So I would put that where we would have strengths, because in the case of the layout of your resume, it would be professional objectives, then your education, and then your projects and experience, and then your volunteerism. Yeah? We okay there, Joel?
All right. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so as I mentioned before, many organizations are now using applicant tracking systems. Yes, you all have made it easier for us recruiters, but in doing so, you have made it a little difficult for you and other job seekers. So you'll notice for the advertisements or for the resumes for the applicant tracking system, it's not as graphical as the other one. Oops, seem to have lost the screen. Because this type of resume is just going to be read by a computer initially, and they are going to make the shortlisting, or they're going to identify what they consider to be the ideal candidate to go forward. You'll find that these resumes, you aren't required for it to be pretty, for want of a better term. So the photo definitely wouldn't be there. The bright colors wouldn't be there because a software is not really going to care about that. Are you all seeing the screen? By chance, or is it blank for you too?
Oh, it's blank.
It's black. Okay, let's see if we can get that solved. But while doing that, we'll continue. So just as in the first resume that I discussed, where there will be your name and a summary statement, that still pertains in the ATS, or the applicant tracking system resume. The difference will be the size of the font and the fact that there will be no colors, no images in this type of resume. So for a recruiter, it will be kind of plain and boring to read. So that's another reason why you need to make sure that the information is concise. So when it does get to them, they're interested in reading it. So you will maintain the same headings that you would have had in the previous resume. And that would be, anybody remember what we had before? What we started with?
Summary.
Your summary, thank you. And what will come after your summary? After your summary should come like your skills, or next to your summary should have your skills, then your work experience, then your education. So we're talking about the format of the resume. That was just the order in which things should appear. Something that I want us to be mindful of. You know, we're trying to put a lot of information into a short period, into a short page, limited space. That doesn't mean that you should make it difficult for someone to read. In terms of the size of the font, the body of the document, the font size should not go below 11. And your headings should not be more than 14. So if you're going to put things in heading, like summary and experience and qualifications, definitely make sure they are bold and no more than size 14. And the body of your resume information should not be less than size 11. Another thing that you have to make sure is the type of font that you're going to use. So back in the day, the default font for Word was Times New Roman. I think we had Arial as well. What's the default font these days? Anybody knows?
Is that Calibri? Not sure.
No, it's not Calibri. Calibri is so 2023. And that's one of the other things that we have to be mindful of as well, because it was Arial, it was Times New Roman, and I think it changed this year to, and I'm just double checking. Yes, it did change. It changed to Aptos. So these fonts are supposed to be crisper and use less ink when printing. You don't want to use a font that is difficult to read. So when looking at the font that you're choosing, I mean, you don't want to use something like Agency, which kinds of scrunches the letters together. And you don't want to use a text like Algerian, which is loud and big and flowery. You don't want to use something that's going to take up a lot of space on the page as well, because remember, the page, you have limited resources. You have to utilize that space on the page efficiently as well. So when you identify the fonts that you want to use, make sure it's one of those clear to read fonts like Arial, Times New Roman, Calibri, or Aptos. And make sure that your headings are clearly identified as well. So even when looking at the resume that would be used that's ATS friendly, remember the software is going to be filtering based on keywords that have been placed in a job posting as well. What you need to understand is that when crafting your resume based on the job posting, again, you utilize those keywords from the job description. So the first step is to review that job posting and highlight the skills, the experience, and the qualifications that they're looking for. And then you're going to tailor your resume to fit that job posting or job application. So you would notice in this resume that we're looking at on the screen, which is the ATS friendly resume. You all see the screen now, right? With the new resume up. Can I just get a thumbs up if you all are seeing the ATS friendly resume? Awesome. Yeah. So with this resume, you'll notice it's not as eye-catching as the last one with Andrew Clark. But the things that do stand out would be the headers, the education, the work experience. Joelle, this is what I was talking about when I was referring to where your university projects could be placed and your activities or your volunteerism could be placed there as well, which would be underneath your university projects. So for the ATS friendly resume, you will integrate the key skills and experience that have been placed in a job posting. So even in your work experience section, that's where you're going to use keywords to highlight that you have the skill set that they're looking for based on the job posting. So there are a lot of buzzwords when it comes to resume writing. People think that everybody's looking for someone who is a good communicator, someone who is an effective leader, because those are things that you hear a lot about in the business world. But what you have to make sure is that you opt for simple words. So it's not just buzzwords that you're going to be using. And if you are using the buzzwords, make sure that it's relevant to the job posting that you're applying for. And always use verbs or action words that can showcase your achievements. So you'll notice when we are talking about the work experience here, if you can see, it says built a dashboard or a particular type of dashboard. It says that it designed the data pipeline architecture. So you're seeing the action words coming out to show the things that you have accomplished. So the key in designing your ATS-friendly resume would be to make sure that the formatting is easy or simple for scannability. So you need to opt for, as I was mentioning before, standard fonts. So Arial, Calibri, Times New Roman, and a simple layout. You use clear headings in your section. So as it says in this one, education, work experience, and of course use bullet points to highlight your achievements. So what you're going to do when you're uploading this document, however, because normally when you are applying to a job or an organization that uses an ATS, they'll ask you to upload your resume. Use your doc or docx extension files, not necessarily your PDF files, to upload in those instances just to make it easy for scannability. And just need to remind everyone of this, while the ATS does the initial screening, it eventually reaches the human who is going to have to read it. So make sure that you include metrics or numbers when talking about building the team. So you'll notice under the work experience, it would have said something like aggregated unstructured data for 20 plus sources. So there's a number there, a metric there to actually quantify the work that you would have done. Now, there's spell check in Word. You have things like Grammarly that's readily available to you. Please use these resources. Regardless if your resume is going before human eyes or if it's going into an ATS, proofread the document before finalizing. Typos, manager versus manger. It happens all the time. You know, you want to be careful. You want to look for that because you can't say in your resume that one of your skill sets is that you're meticulous and then you have proofing errors in your resume. Also, don't try to inflate yourself too much in your resume. Make sure that what you're putting in your resume is what is true because your resume is what's going to get you in front of the person who's going to be interviewing you. And your integrity is the only thing that's yours. Make sure what's on your resume, you can back it up, that it is true, that it clearly reflects the work that you have done or things that you have been a part of, projects that you have worked on. So, just to summarize, in terms of what your resume should look like now, because in most instances, it goes before or it goes through an ATS. You want to make sure that your name, first and last name, is clearly stated. There's not too many graphics going on so that it's not too busy. You'll notice the resume on the right is pretty similar to the one that I would have started off with. This is a common template that is used where you have your picture and you have some pretty graphics on it. What we want to move towards is more like the one that's on the left, which is ATS friendly. Your heading is clear. You notice that they're in bullet points and they're easy to read. Something that I want to point out to persons, you know, we like to put our address in your resume. I would not recommend putting your full address. So you don't want to put 123 Sesame Street Lane, apartment 24D. That's not what you want to put in terms of your address. What I would recommend is that you put your city, and if you're applying for a remote job, your country and your city, not the full address. But you're all in cybersecurity, so I'm sure you all will be a little more cautious than the average Joe when sharing information. And so again, just to recap, we are aiming to move towards having our resumes look like the one on the left, although we may have those that look like the one on the right, only if you know if the organization is using an ATS versus a human to sort through. Even if you want to use one that has a graphic in it, you don't want too many colors, you don't want too many pictures, and you want to use pleasing or pleasant tones. So this brown and shades of brown is not something that you would want to use, especially as an IT professional. When you're thinking IT professional, think of some of the colors that you are familiar with. We definitely don't want to use red because when someone sees red, what do they think? When you see the color red, what do you think of?
Danger.
Danger. Anybody thinks of anything else when they see the color red?
Anger.
Anger. So red is one of those colors that stirs up like extreme emotions with you. It's one of those very passionate colors. You stop, danger, anger, it's affiliated with emotions like that. So that's not a color that you want to use on your resume because you don't want the recruiter being angry at you. You don't want the recruiter saying, but what is this? Why are you using red? It kind of evokes some really strong emotions. So that's not one of the colors I would recommend anyone use on a resume, even if it is the color associated with the company. So for those of us who live in Trinidad and Tobago, most government or state agencies would have something of red, white, or black in it as part of their branding or their color scheme. I still would not use the red on a resume to move forward. And just because, as I said before, red tends to evoke some really strong emotions with people. Blue is a safe color to go with. It's for trust. And if you're going to use green, also you need to be mindful of this shade of green. Electric green or neon green is not necessarily a shade that you want to go with. Right? So before we move on, any questions? So just to recap on this section, we are talking about your resume for the ATS. You need to make sure that you use a clean, clear format with standard fonts. Think Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri, and the latest one, which is Aptos. Of course, make sure your sections are easily identified and use bullet points. Use action words or verbs when describing your accomplishments and achievements based on your work experience. And also avoid PDF layouts or creative layouts. Many people go to Canva to look for a format or a layout for a resume. If you're going through ATS, I wouldn't suggest you use the Canva layout. If you're going for applying for a position and you know that it's going to be viewed by a human, then by all means, use that Canva layout, use that Word document template in order to develop your resume. So now you have a resume that's effective. Anyone has any questions before we move on? No questions means all you fall asleep on me or walk away or I'm boring y'all or I'm just that good. Is it A, B, or C?
You're good.
Okay, so we'll go with C then. Thanks for taking that one. So we're moving on to the interviews. Your resume has gotten you in front of an organization and they are going to interview you. This world of interviews is just as bad as resume writing in terms of the amount of things that you can consider. So depending on the organization you're going to work for or the position you're applying for, there's so many hoops to jump through in order to move forward to be identified as the successful candidate. When we think of interviews, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you guys? When you're looking at an interview, what is it you think you're going to be doing? Stress. Yes, nobody wants to go into an interview, and sometimes some organizations make it really bad for you. It could be a very stressful situation. Yes, it can be a type of interrogation. Anything else comes to mind when you're thinking of interviews? So interviews comes with many stages. For some organizations, you may start off with a phone interview or phone screening. So they've gotten your resume, they like how you're looking on paper, they decide to give you a call and to see what you're sounding like, if you will be one of those persons that they'll be interested in. I want to strongly suggest to you, if you get invited to an interview, that you interview the company as well. Have you seen those memes and TikToks and stuff about a toxic work environment? And that they sounded so nice in the interview, but when you got there, the company was something else. So you use the interview period and all of these interview stages that the company is doing to see if you're going to be a good fit for them, to see if they are also going to be a good fit for you. Because in some instances, people are going to stay with a company for a minimum of 3 years before they decide to move on to another company. So make sure that when you're interviewing for a position, that you also interview the company as well. So in terms of the different stages of interviews, you can have a phone interview, then you can have a technical interview, and probably end with a behavioral interview, and depending on the level of the position that you're interviewing for, a psychometric assessment. So just to give an idea of how some interviews run, when you have your first interview, which may be the phone screening, then you could move on to another interview, which would be a technical interview. This could be a test that's given to you. It could be a E-tray exercise where you're called into the organization and you're given a task to perform and you're submitting your responses to that. It could be a case study that you have to provide a solution to. It could be that you're doing a presentation based on information that you would have gotten. Sometimes some organizations have what is called an assessment center, where you sit down for the whole day in the organization and you do all of these things. You do the E-tray exercise, you do the presentation skills, you do the technical assessment, and you do your behavioral interview. You can also do things like group tests or group skills, where if the organization happens to be a team-based organization or it has a matrix structure, which is a structure where although you have a direct line of report, you may also be required to report to someone else, depending on the project you're working on. They may do team exercises or team group assessments to see if you're a team player, to see how you perform in a group of people or a group in general. So some people might spend the whole day there just doing that. And then the part that most people are stressed out about will be the behavioral interview stage, which is normally the one where you're put in front of a panel and they ask you questions. They will ask you questions about your experience and things that you have done, things that you have put on your resume. One of the tips to responding One of the tips to responding to behavioral type interviews is the STAR methodology. So if you're going into a competency-based interview, that means it's a structured interview. All of the candidates get asked the same questions, and then they compare the responses based on what you have identified as your work experience and what you have done in the interview as well. When we're talking about responding based on or giving a STAR response, when you ask the question, what you need to identify in your response is a situation, the task that you were assigned, so that's S for situation, T for task, A for the action that you took, R for the result of your action. So most competency-based or structured type interview questions will start off as, tell me about a time when, or describe for me when you, and they will ask, tell me about a time when you had to deal with an irate customer, or describe for me a time when you had to negotiate with a client to secure business. In responding to those questions, you're going to provide the situation. So if we're going with the first example with, tell me about a time when you had to deal with an irate customer, you're going to give a situation where there was an irate customer. So this customer was standing in the line for 2 hours before they came up to the bank counter to be attended to. What was the task that you had to perform? They wanted to make a deposit of savings. However, it was their child's piggy bank that they brought in and they didn't even open it and it was full of coins. What was the action you took? It was close to my lunchtime and my supervisor told me that I only had 5 minutes to deal with the client before proceeding to lunch. So I had to make a decision on whether to tell the client to hold on and have someone else attend to them, or to attend to the client and explain to my supervisor that I did not follow the instructions to go for lunch in 5 minutes. So you're going to talk about the action you took. And it could be that you would have told the irate customer, here's what, you see all of this, I can't deal with this now, because I had to go to lunch in 5 minutes and you are even empty the coins. And what we're supposed to do is give you bags to put all the coins in the bags before you can make a deposit. If you give an irate customer a response like that, what do you think the end result would be? Is the customer going to be happy and just say, all right, well, you go on your lunch, give me the bags, I will fill it out and come back another day? Do you think that would be the end result? Hi, you all hearing me? Hello, anybody there? So yes, it does depend on the customer. But let's say, does that help de-escalate the customer from being aggravated and annoyed after having to wait for 2 hours? You palming them off and saying, I can't deal with this now, take the bags and go fill up your coins and then come back. Or do you think the customer will be more amenable if you stayed there and assisted them? Remember, this is an irate customer that you're talking about. So even in responding to the questions that have been asked, you need to remember to provide the situation, the task, the action, and the results of your action, or the results of the action that you took. So I saw there was a question on what level of employment can psychometric tests be applied to? Psychometric tests can be applied to any level of employment because the tests are geared towards identifying the behavioral nature, the behavioral components of an employee. Most times, because these tests are costly, most organizations tend to apply it strictly to managerial levels or executive levels. So when preparing for technical interviews, I would always recommend that you go back to the job posting, or if they have sent you the job description, and become familiar with some of the tasks that you have to perform in the jobs. If, for example, as we were saying, you're going to be a software programmer, you might have to do some coding. Look at the type of work that the organization does and try to brush up on the language that they would have identified in their job posting and the coding that might come in for that type of role. When preparing for your behavioral interviews, which is where you have to use the STAR method that I just mentioned, you should also have questions prepared for the organization to see if their culture is one that you would be comfortable working in. So in most interviews, they do give you an opportunity after they have interrogated you or grilled you for you to ask them questions. Don't ever say, no, I have no questions at this time, unless you're not interested in the organization. Because that's exactly what that statement says to the recruiter. I'm not interested in the organization. I don't have any questions. So where do you get your questions from? You can either get your questions based on what has been discussed in the interview. So if there's something that was said by the panelist in the interview about what the role is required, and you may need clarity, write it down so that you can ask at that point in time. What I like to say is that an interview, you need to make it a conversation. It's not just they asking questions and you answering. You are also looking for information. I often recommend, even if you're doing in-person interviews or virtual interviews, you have a notepad close by where you can jot down key things or some questions that you may want to ask. You can even use your notepad to just capture key points in the questions that they may be asking you so that you would be able to formulate your response before answering. While an interview may be timed, do not rush yourself to respond to questions that have been asked. Some of the ways that you can, for want of a better word, stall for time while you formulate your questions, after they've asked their question, you can rephrase it to make sure, one, that you understand what was being asked so that the response you give will be what they are looking for. So you can say, just to be clear, what you're trying to find out is, tell me, is a time that I would have dealt with an angry customer and what was the result of that. Or you can say, and another stalling technique would be using the terms like, oh, that's an interesting question. Let me think about that a second. And it really is a second that you're thinking about it because you're just formulating your response in your mind. Or you can say something like, thanks for that question. I do have experience with dealing with customers or clients. And generally speaking, this is how I view them. A specific instance would be, and then you go into the situation, the task, the action, and the result that you would have taken. Any questions on interviewing? Because I know I'm coming up on my time. So in the Caribbean culture, many people are afraid to ask about salary. However, on job applications, don't they ask you to put a salary range? I would ask about the salary. And I would say, so I understand that you requested information on what my salary expectations are. Can you tell me what the range of this salary is? Or what's the starting salary for this position? Don't be afraid to ask for the salary. I like to ask for a day in the life of the role being advertised. That's a good question to ask. A better question would be, what would be your expectations of the person filling this role? Because depending on the role that you have, a day in the life of the role may change. Every day may look like a different something. So what are your expectations for the person filling this role in the first 30 days or first 60 days? That way you'll be able to tell, one, if the organization is simply results driven. So that means they just want to see the end result, or the organization's culture may be of a different nature in that they may want to see something else. They're more team oriented, so they want someone to be always involved with other co-workers or members of their team. So if you don't have anything that comes to mind when you're in the interview, some kind of question that you could have asked, which is one to similar that I would have mentioned above. What are the expectations for this role? Something you can ask is, in the organization, where is this role? Something else you could ask is, what brought about this vacancy? So you may not ask about the turnover rate, but if you ask what brought about the vacancy, because you could find out, oh, someone might have retired, someone might have resigned, or the organization is expanding. That's why we are advertising for this role. It will give you a sense of what's going on in the company as well. So if you want to negotiate for a bigger salary, first you need to know what they're offering you. And at that point in time, you should also know if the salary is a fixed point salary. That means that that's it, nothing else. Or if it lies on a range. And if it does lie on a range, the range usually has a minimum, a maximum, and a midpoint. You could try and pinpoint where they're placing you. Also, you can ask at the point where they've made the offer, if or at what time can you negotiate for the salary? Because some organizations, maybe based on your work experience, will offer you the midpoint. And depending on your performance or how long you're with them, they may move higher. If you are at an entry-level position, you've got no work experience, then you need to prove yourself to the organization so that you have something to negotiate with rather than starting to negotiate at that point in time. Any other questions before we close off? So one thing that not many people do that I would definitely recommend is that after the interview, you send a thank you email. Just thanking them for it. If there was a question that was asked in the interview, or if there was something that you may have wanted to ask in the interview, you could probably post the follow-up question to the HR person because more than likely that's the person who's going to be reading your email. What that does as well is that it shows that you are interested in the organization and it gives an opportunity for you to continue the conversation even beyond the interview. So thank you for meeting with me. It was an interesting, don't use the word interesting because that's definitely overused, but I'm just saying it was an interesting experience. I am particularly interested in joining the organization and learning more about your initiative or something that they would have spoken about in the interview that they would have said the organization is moving toward, or something of interest that you would have come out in the organization. You know, something that you may have heard in the interview about the organization that has piqued your interest, you can use the email, and that would be a good segue point to just get something extra out of the interview and give you that extra push in the eyes of the recruiter. Do not hound the recruiter. Oftentimes people feel that HR keeping things back after the interview. It may not be HR. It could very well be that they've seen a number of really good candidates and it's a hard decision for them to make at this point in time, and they just need a little extra time to get that out of the way or to make a decision. So how do you broach the topic of culture? Just as you are trying to sell yourself to the organization in the interview, the organization should be trying to sell itself to you. So if you want to talk about culture in the organization, you can ask them, what is their vision statement? Because not many organizations put that on a website. Some do put up their mission statement, some do put up their vision statement. You can ask them, in terms of employees, what are some ways that you ensure that your mission statement is being fulfilled? You know, that tends to get persons on the panel thinking. If you ask, what's the culture of the organization? You may not get a straight answer. You may definitely get a textbook answer or a rehearsed answer. Any other questions? Because I know I've gone over my time. So I want to thank you all for being attentive. I hope I didn't bore you all too much, and for the questions as well. And I hope you all took away something to definitely improve your resumes and to get you in front of the interview panel and help you through those interrogations. Have a good evening, guys. I'm going to hand you back over to Anthony.
Well. I don't know about you, but I have learned a lot tonight. One thing I have definitely learned is that resumes and CVs are not the same thing. And I learned what a CV truly is. So, one of the most difficult things for me usually is, in the interviewing room, trying to convince these people that I am the right fit for their organization. And that being interviewed is definitely a skill, and it takes a lot of practice, and it's like presenting yourself, or public speaking. It's a lot like public speaking. So at this point, I would like to thank firstly Ruan for sharing her expertise and her knowledge with us. And I know that we would have taken away nuggets of knowledge and wisdom and stuff that we can use to enhance our resumes and our success rate when it comes to interviews. And I would like to thank all of you, members and non-members of the ISC2 Caribbean chapter, for being part of this education and training session. And we look forward to having more of these webinars so that we'd all become more enlightened and more well-rounded professionals within the cybersecurity and IT and whatever space we belong in. So I'd like to thank everyone again, and please have a good and safe night. Bye. Yes, you would get a copy of the recording. Yes, so we will share the recording, right, with everyone. Once you request it. Okay, guys, have a good night. Bye.